Welcome, Dr. Sabet. We are very happy you are in our department. I would like to ask you a few questions.
Great.
What is the U.S. position on drug legalization and particularly on marijuana legalization?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and Director Kurlikowski sends his best regards. But to answer your question, it's very clear and very simple. Well, we've said, this administration has said over and over again, and the President has made very clear, and the Director Kurlikowski has made it very clear, that we are against any kind of legalization, including marijuana legalization. We've been very strong on that. In fact, the President, in his most recent town hall meeting at the University of Maryland, was asked this very question and responded with an unequivocal no, that we would not support decriminalization or legalization.
Thanks. And what is the reason for this position?
Well, again, we think that it would increase use. We know that it would lower price and increase the availability of drugs. And therefore, the consequences of drugs would increase. In some ways, prescription drugs, which are actually tightly controlled, tightly regulated. What has been the result? Well, more people use those substances than illegal substances. There really is a normalization of those substances. And we've seen an increased cost, whether it's ER admissions, whether it's arrests. In fact, most people don't know there are more arrests in the United States for alcohol than for all illegal drugs combined. Why? Because more people use alcohol.
Yes.
Because it's legal. So we don't want to make the same mistake with future substances.
What are the major drug-related emergencies in the U.S. and which are the most widely used drugs?
Well, it kind of relates to the previous question. It's no surprise that the most widely used drugs are actually those that are legal and available. Alcohol, tobacco, and prescription drugs. Marijuana doesn't fall that far behind. It's also widely used. But we've seen, especially in the last 10 years, a real resurgence of the use of prescription drugs for non-medical use, the opiates. They've been much more widely prescribed. Many doctors are ill-equipped to prescribe them properly. There are people who go to different doctors and pharmacies to get multiple quantities of these illegal drugs. These are powerful opiates, many of these drugs. So we've seen a huge spike in deaths and in ER admissions, even as the use of illegal drugs has actually fallen in the last 30 years. The use of cocaine is low relative to what it was in the 70s and early 80s. The use of marijuana has stabilized. It's still too high, but actually when you look at alcohol, there are many more users of alcohol and the prescription drugs.
Very interesting.
What kind of strategies have been adopted by the U.S. to deal with the problem of drug and alcohol-related road accidents?
So drug and drunk driving, well, you know, we had in the United States a very big problem with drunk driving, especially up until the late 1970s and 80s. In fact, there was a phrase that was used all the time saying, just have one last drink for the road. Right before you leave someone's house, have one more drink. And that phrase is obsolete now. That is totally unacceptable. And the reason is we had a huge educational campaign and also very strict laws when it came to drunk driving. So there's a legal limit for alcohol, which we've identified in terms of an impairment limit. You know, young people can't have any alcohol in their system, whether it's impairment limit or not. And all states have had to adopt those policies. The result of those policies and this cultural shift for alcohol has resulted in saving tens of thousands of lives in the United States because of alcohol. With the increase of prescription drugs and the use of illegal drugs, we've, however, seen a resurgence or a surge of drugged driving. So these are illegal drugs or prescription drugs used non-medically, or even sometimes prescription drugs used properly by the right person, but you actually shouldn't drive when under the influence of them. We have seen an increase in that. And there was a recent survey showing that 1 in 8 nighttime weekend drivers in the United States tested positive for an illegal drug. That's very concerning to us. So we're doing a couple of things. One thing we're trying to do is encourage our states to adopt what we call per se laws. Per se laws means if there's any quantity of drugs in your system, it's illegal. We're never going to get to a 0.08 like we have for alcohol limit, for illegal drugs. We really say that any use of illegal drugs is actually dangerous, not just a certain level.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we're trying to do. The second thing we're trying to do is learn from our experience with alcohol and increase the awareness. And let people know that they shouldn't actually take pills and drive, that they shouldn't smoke marijuana and drive. There are many young people who think smoking marijuana helps them drive because it makes them slower and it makes them drive slower, etc. We actually know that marijuana has a very high impairment ability on driving because of the motor skills and parts of the brain that it affects, especially for adolescents. So we're trying to get the awareness message out. We, of course, need to increase the research, so we're focusing also on that. And the other thing we're doing is we want to help law enforcement officers identify drug drivers because you're not going to have the breathalyzer like you do with alcohol. So there have to be other behavioral indicators for law enforcement to be able to say, this person is under the influence of drugs and we need to do something about it.
Did you present a specific resolution in Vienna about this topic?
Yeah, so this drugged driving is one of Director Kurlikowski's 3 signature initiatives, the other 2 being drug prevention and prescription drug abuse because of those problems we spoke about earlier. So drugged driving is a priority of our office. And so one of the things we're actually trying to do in the U.S. is learn from other countries. And I mean, as you well know, Italy and other countries in the European Union have been grappling with the issue of drug driving for a long time and have actually done more than the United States has done on this issue. So we want to learn from other countries. We want to make sure that it's really considered a global problem with a global response. Because we're not just talking about drug drivers, everyday drivers. We're also talking about truck drivers who have to drive very long distances and they're at high risk of amphetamine use, especially in certain countries. We're talking about other impairment for trains and airplanes and other ways that drugs can impair motor skills. So really is a global problem, and that's why we presented the resolution in Vienna at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, as you mentioned. And we were very happy that the EU sponsored it with us and 17 other countries.
Yes,
so it's really a global problem.
Could you explain your project named HOPE?
Sure. So Project HOPE was a strategy, or is a strategy, first started in Hawaii by a judge there named Steve Alm. And anybody who wants to learn about it can go to their website. It's hopeprobation.org. What this project was, it was an intervention in the criminal justice system.
Yeah.
In the United States, most people who are under the watch of the criminal justice system are actually not in jail. They're not behind bars. They're in the community. They've been let out in something called probation. Probation means, you know, either after a certain time that you have served or the judge can sentence you, basically it means you can live in the community with restrictions. You have to be drug tested. You have to maybe get treatment. You have to have counseling. You have to meet with your officer regularly and talk with them. That's probation. So what was going on in Hawaii was Judge Alm kept seeing the same people, and this is, I think, universal. The same people come in and out of the criminal justice system. They would be arrested, put in jail, released, rearrested again for committing a crime, and he saw this cycle going on and on. So what he said is, we have to do things different. And what he did was, for those people that were on probation in the community, he made sure that they got regular drug tests, and that they were, if they tested positive for their drug test or didn't show up, that automatically it would trigger a 2 to 3 day, for example, sentence in jail. The point is a short sentence in jail, but it would be certain, and it would happen right after the offense. So if you tested positive for drugs, rather than wait a week for your court date, another week to make sure you have a lawyer, and another week for the judge to hear you, that's 3 weeks already, immediately you went into jail for a very short amount of time. Unfortunately, I think in the U.S., oftentimes we treat crimes severely, but also randomly. So depending on your circumstances, depending on the docket, depending on the judge's schedule, you might be sentenced that day, you might not be, and if you are, you may have a very long sentence. The point of Project Hope is to have very short sentences, but close to the crime committed. And the reason is because we know that through cognitive theory and through deterrence theory and cognitive behavioral theory, that people will change behavior if they know there's a consequence very quickly after it happened. It doesn't have to be a severe consequence. So I give an example. If you tell your child to clean their room, okay? If you tell your child, John, you have to clean your room right now. If you don't clean your room right now, there's a 50% chance that in 6 months, I will ground you for 2 years. That is, for a child and for somebody who's going to react to a consequence, that's not a threat. But if you tell them, Johnny, if you don't clean your room now, you will not go to the movie tonight with your friend. The movie starts in an hour. If you want to go to the movies, you clean your room right now. Your child will respond to that.
Yes.
They will respond to that before they respond to something that's distant, even if it's a severe sentence, distant. So this sort of theory was used in the criminal justice system, and there have been fabulous results that we're looking at right now. Other places are adopting it. They saw a 70% reduction in the positive test for methamphetamine. They saw a massive reduction in violent crime. We all know the person who stopped smoking cigarettes, for example, because their wife was going to kick them out of the house. They didn't seek treatment. They stopped because there was a strong behavioral response to that threat. That was a very strong threat. It's the same kind of thing here. So obviously it's not going to work for everybody. Many people still need treatment. But most people in the HOPE project actually didn't need treatment. They stopped with this threat. And it was very interesting for us to observe.
Thanks.
That's a long answer to your question.
Okay. Last question.
What do you think about the recent report of Global Commission on Drug Policy?
Well, that was a very interesting report for us to read, and we've actually been very clear that we want to focus on interventions that work. We actually have the tools to implement strong drug policies and policies that reduce suffering, increase the public health, and increase public safety. We don't think legalization is the way to go. We actually think there's a host of different policies, whether it's drug courts, whether it's community-based prevention, whether it's recovery support services, that you can implement in a way that's humane and cost-effective and reduces drug use and its consequences. You don't actually need to legalize drugs if you don't want to put everybody in prison. You shouldn't put everybody in prison. There are a lot of things you can do here that actually work and have proven to work. So unfortunately, I think we sort of thought the Global Commission took a pretty extreme position after making some points, good points about the current system. And there are flaws with the current system. We all know that those need to be changed. But you don't need to legalize drugs in order to change those things.
Yeah. Many thanks for your clear intervention.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.